Happy race day, everyone, and welcome into the Awesemo NASCAR Live Before Lock shows. We're here to get you ready for today's NASCAR race, the Folds of Honor QuikTrip 500. Of course, lock going down just over an hour from now. Green flag is going to drop at 3:17 p.m. each time, and we are here for the next hour to break this race down for you. Of course, you got any questions, leave those right here on the YouTube chat. Of course, if you leave a super chat, it'll go to the top of the line. Also, got the score chat up as well. You can leave a question in there as well. Of course, we are sponsored by PrizePicks. Later on in the show, we will talk a little about PrizePicks plays, about what plays are sticking out to us. But of course, as always, here on the Awesemo NASCAR Live for Lock show, I am joined by Chris Pennell. Chris, great to talk to you. And of course, game theory. I mean, let's just get right into this one. And, the first thing I wrote down on this one, stack the back is pretty much the best way to describe this one today.
What's up, Jason? Looking forward to another good show at the newly reconfigured Atlanta Motor Speedway. And yeah, it's looking like stack the back is going to be the way to go. If you were looking at old Atlanta track history, it is no longer relevant. They have completely redone the track for where it's now like a mini Daytona. And if you guys played Daytona at the beginning of the season, we were basically just stacking the back. Now, this is going to be a bit of a hybrid intermediate / super speedway, so I'm not going to go full on crazy on some of the scrubs in the back, but the main chalk plays like Ricky Stenhouse, Martin Truex Jr.'s guys we'll get into later on, you're going to see them popping up in projections just about everywhere, especially if you're looking at the Awesemo projections today.
Yeah, that was literally the second thing I wrote down is, are we trusting Ricky Stenhouse Jr. after last week? Unfortunately, I'm sitting there, I'm watching the race, and as this race is unfolding, we're getting towards the end, I'm sitting there going, Well, didn't have enough Briscoe in my lineups.
Right there with you. I did not see Briscoe coming out dominating and winning a race over the likes of guys like William Byron, Chase Elliott. But this next gen car has proved that drivers with talent, even if they're not in a top tier ride, can certainly excel.
Yeah, that was kind of the funny thing towards the end of the race when the yellow flag comes out there just a couple laps ago, and you see that Briscoe team go, "Oh no, no, we did not." That was like the last thing they were hunting for. But man, congratulations to him there. Of course, when we talk about roster construction in terms of how we're developing our rosters, and obviously today you mentioned about stacking the back, but it's not a situation of looking at dominators here. I know I was watching a video you did earlier where you kind of talked about, this just isn't a race that you're looking at dominators at.
Yeah, so we always like to talk about setting up dominator groups in the Fantasy Cruncher or whatever optimizer. And that's not something I'm doing this week. I'm not setting up a dominator group. If you want to set a group up of a few drivers, just for example, starting into the top 12, like a max of 2, I think that's the best way to go about it because, yes, there's a lot of laps today, 325. Normally at a plate style race, we're talking 160, 200 laps. But with fast laps being completely random, laps that are only going to count, we're only going to quarter a point for that. And if they're going to keep interchanging, dominators are not something I am really inclined to worry about. Now, I'm still rostering some drivers starting closer to the front in tournaments, like Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, Chase Elliott. But if it's a cash game, I am strictly going basically from Larson and back today.
And of course, as you're talking about, developing those lineups there, cash versus GPP. I mean, obviously, if you're playing multi-entries, you're going to take you're going to get some shots everywhere. I know when I was doing my crunches earlier, there was, one of the things that I personally did was there was just guys lower tier salaries I just didn't want to get to because like that to me is once you learn how to use an optimizer like Fantasy Cruncher is if you don't sit there and tell them don't give me this guy, you might all of a sudden get a lot of say Josh Bilicki as an example.
Right. And while on paper, it's, if you're looking at a super speedway, you're like, yeah, Josh Bilicki starting at 36 looks fine. But since we're viewing this as more of an intermediate hybrid, if there's not a ton of carnage like we see at Daytona, these guys might get stuck in like 28, 29th place, and they're not going to hit their projected ceilings.
And of course, if you do got any questions, be sure to line those up in chat. So let's get right into the upper tier salaries here. So these are drivers that are anywhere from $9K and above over on DraftKings. So we got Ryan Blaney, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, William Byron, Martin Truex Jr., Tyler Reddick, all 9K and above over on DraftKings. I want to start with William Byron because you had mentioned this earlier today where you said, I mean, this guy could get a top 5 finish, but you're just hoping he doesn't wreck out.
And that's been the problem with William Byron at super speedway type racing. And I hate to keep referencing it because if we're still at Atlanta and it's going to race like a hybrid, but Byron has been a guy that's very hit or miss because if he's not wrecking, he's typically a guy that's running into the top 5 and get a top 5 finish. He's also a recent winner at Daytona. But there's a lot of finishes that are in the deep 30s, which are really skewing his numbers. So if you're playing guys like Byron, Harvick, those guys sitting within like the top 10, top 12, you basically just have to hope they don't wreck. Because if they don't wreck, top 5 upside. But if they do wreck, you're just sinking your lineups. And Byron is certainly one of those guys.
And when we look at the chalk of this tier, it is 2 drivers that everyone's going to want to get to. That's Kyle Larson, who's starting 21st, and Martin Truex Jr. starting 26th. So they fit the motto of stacked back.
Yes, and the funny thing about those two is that they're actually pretty bad super speedway drivers, but it's just so hard to get away from them. If you're looking at the past 10 races super speedways, Martin Truex Jr. is averaging 12.4 DraftKings points race with the average finish of 22nd. Kyle Larson, even worse, negative 2.3 DraftKings points race with an average finish of 27th. But again, since we're viewing this as a hybrid, both these guys are very good intermediate tracks. And if it's not going to be a complete carnage fest, certainly guys that can get within the top 10, top 5, potentially win the race. And with the PD upside they offer and the pricing isn't that bad, very easy to fit them in. So the ownership certainly makes sense.
And when you look at the drivers here and we'll kind of correlate to the guys who are starting in the top 5 here, and as much as we're talking about how crucial place differential is, you look at Ryan Blaney starting 6th, starting 2nd, Chase Elliott starting 6th, Joey Logano starting 3rd, Kyle Busch starting 4th. Talked about Ryan Blaney because I know we're going to talk about him a little bit later on with PrizePicks, but this is a guy, I mean, while we're not talking about, dominators being a big thing today, this is someone who could rack up some sled pretty early.
Yeah, and the thing I really like about Ryan Blaney early on is that he's got Joey Logano starting third. So if they can just team up, I would assume Joey Logano can push Ryan Blaney at the very beginning of the race, probably up until the competition caution, unless that's going to be Chase Briscoe. But I don't think it's out of their own possibility where Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano are up front the entire day. And if they don't wreck out, these guys could easily finish 1-2. They're two of the best plate racers in all of NASCAR. It's the best average finishes. Ryan Blaney, 3 wins, 5 top 5, 7 top 10. So as long as they stay clean, I'm really liking guys like Blaney and Logano today up top because I love using Team Penske at super speedways.
And by the way, that competition caution is going to come at lap 45. For those wondering, weather in the 60s, and according to Bob Pockras, 0% chance of rain. Perfect. So that's always a good thing. I know that always kind of comes up of what is the rain potential there. When you look at the other drivers, also I didn't mention Tyler Reddick. He's starting 5th. He's the guy that I'm just saying if you want to get to someone that has low ownership, Tyler Reddick's that guy today.
Yeah, and the thing with Tyler Reddick is we know how good he's been so far this season. He's brought a ton of speed, but again, with fast laps not being a thing today, completely random. That's usually why I play Tyler Reddick, is because of fast laps, because he typically starts close to the front. But since we can't project that, I have a hard time seeing him dominate over the Penske guys and Logano and Blaney. So he's just one of those guys where I'm not really getting too much.
Of course, appreciate everyone that's in here on a Sunday afternoon. Be sure to smash that thumbs up button. That really does help us out a lot as well. Helps out with that YouTube algorithm. And of course, if you're not subscribed to Awesemo right here on YouTube, be sure to do that. Got a ton of great shows for you each and every day. Of course, I come up here 2 hours after us will be NBA Deeper Dive as guys will get you ready for tonight's NBA slate. So be sure to check out that as we go on here. Other drivers that we haven't mentioned that are in this tier. So we got Kevin Harvick. He's 9,600 on DraftKings, 11,000 over there on FanDuel. Denny Hamlin starting 15th, 10-1 over on DK, 12,000 on FanDuel. I got to imagine people are going to be looking at Denny Hamlin today.
Yeah, I for sure like Denny Hamlin quite a bit. Any single time we had at a super speedway, he's always going to be chalk at Daytona, always chalk at Talladega. This starting spot's pretty nice. He's not in like a massive PD spot because you have Kyle Larson there starting in 21st. You have Truex at 26. So I'm assuming he's going to be a little bit lower owned than them. So if you want to get leverage on Hamlin, maybe go a little bit lighter on guys like Larson, Truex, who are not good super speedway racers, and you can get Hamlin, who's one of the best in the entire field. In 2 recent wins at these, 6 top 5, 7 top 10s, one of the best average finishes. I can certainly get behind Hamlin in all formats. Pretty cheap on DraftKings, relatively 10,100. FanDuel not hard to get there as well. Imagine he's gonna be pretty high on both sites, but not quite as high as Truex and Larson. As far as Kevin Harvick goes, he's in one of those weird spots similar to William Byron, Alex Bowman, where do you really want to play the guys starting from 8th to 12th because they don't offer you too much PD upside? Their prices are right around the Truex's, Hamlin's, and Larson's, where they're just so much easier to click on because they had extra PD. But Harvick is quietly a pretty solid super speedway driver. I don't think a lot of people view him as such, but his average finishes are not too far off of guys like Elliott, Hamlin, Blaney, multiple top 5. So I think he's a decent turn play, and I would prefer him over the likes of a guy like William Byron, Kyle Busch.
I mentioned 2 questions we got in here. We talked about, Fantasy Cruncher and groups, and I created one of the groups I created was I just labeled it punt. The right. Punt plays, which I mean, just low tier salaries, basically the best way to describe it. But Aaron mentioned he said that he made a group with only 1 driver in the top 10. I don't mind that group. I like that.
Yeah, I don't mind. I was a little bit more aggressive in my group where I said 0 to 12 in the top 0 to 2 inside the top 12. But 0 to 1 is certainly fine in the top 10 today because one of those drivers could sneak into the optimal lap. I believe in the trucks race and the Xfinity race, you saw like one guy starting into the top 15 that made the optimal, but for the most part, mainly PD. So I think he's certainly on the right track.
Yeah, I want to say the guy when I did my crunch right before the show that was starting in the top 10 that I want to say I had the highest percentage of was actually Kyle Busch.
Yeah, I think it's mainly a price thing there at $9,100 because if it does end up playing more like an intermediate track, Kyle Busch at Las Vegas, which is another intermediate low wear track, which I think is somewhat comparable to Atlanta as far as just the racing surface goes and everything. Busch was in a parts car, went from the back to the front, dominated that race. So at $9,100, it's kind of hard not to like him at that low price point. And over on FanDuel, he's pretty easy to fit into.
Jay asking, do you trust the Gibbs Toyotas?
I want to say yes, because my ownership would say yes. I have a lot of Christopher Bell today. I have a lot of Denny Hamlin. Kyle Busch is one of those guys starting 4th where I'm preferring the Team Penske cars. That's just kind of my personal preference. You can obviously make a case for playing Kyle Busch today. But since it's a drafting race, we're not really worried about what they've done the previous 3 weeks. I'm not too worried about Joe Gibbs today. They should be fine.
Of course, as we move into the mid-tier salaries, supposed to be the drivers that are anywhere in the 6 and 8K range. And, you mentioned about the optimal lineup. I know you talked about this a little earlier about Eric Amarola, who has been optimal in 3 of the 4 races this year, but he's starting 10th. Price point here, 7,600 on DK, 7,300 over on DraftKings. Fairly low ownership.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that stat turns into 3 out of the past 5 races today, because I don't see myself getting too much Eric Amarola. It's just he's in that dead zone, and there's other guys we haven't talked about yet, but Kurt Busch starting 9th, Ross Chastain starting 7th, Eric Amarola starting 10th. It's just really hard to get to those guys because the guys they're priced right around, they offer you so much more PD upside, which is what we are looking for in today's race. So while Amarola has been hot this year, and he's actually not that bad of a driver at super speedways, it's just starting 10th. His path to optimal is definitely a lot harder than everybody else in his price range.
And when you look at the, I guess we'll just get to the chalk of this price range. And it's simply the question I brought up earlier. Do we trust a chalky Ricky Stenhouse Jr. after, especially because there's going to be people who last week who got burned on him that are like, nope, not doing it. You fool me once, you ain't fool me twice.
And I totally understand their grievances because it did not work out like we thought it would last weekend. But this is a different scenario. We are no longer at Phoenix. A little bit tougher to pass there. We're now at a race where these guys are going to be drafting, and Stenhouse is, believe it or not, he's actually one of the better drivers in the field at doing just that. He can be very aggressive, so it's kind of a bit of a wreckers or checkers. I know what they told me was at the very front. I believe it was Brad Keselowski, who loves direct people too, kind of similar to Ricky Stenhouse, took him out, ended up getting a poor finish. But at $700 starting in 28th, if you're playing cash games, you're playing Stenhouse today in tournaments, I definitely understand wanting to get away from Ricky Stenhouse Jr. chalk because it's some of the most volatile chalk in any single DFS sport.
Yeah, no question. I mean, he's the driver that everyone's going to get to, and obviously, starting 28, so you usually that point differential there. Mentioned about Brad Keselowski because there was a question from Steve asking about Keselowski. He's starting 24th, 8,600 on DraftKings, 7,500 over on FanDuel. He's my highest owned driver on DraftKings right now, and he's pretty close to there over on FanDuel. I just like his price point. I know he's been pretty bad this year, but any single time we're at a track like this where people are going to be drafting in a pack, Keselowski is one of the best drivers in the field. I mean, running position, one of the absolute best, one of the best drive ratings. He won the duel earlier this year. He was near the front the entire time in Daytona, absolutely crushed the laps led prop over on PrizePicks that I like the under on. He proved me wrong, so I'm willing to admit that. But starting in 24th, that price point, very easy to get to, and projections love him. Yeah, mention about Chase Briscoe. He started on the pole today, 8,200 on DraftKings, 8,300 over on FanDuel. We didn't want to get there last week, and well, hey man, we don't BS you here. We tell you, it's kind of like like the people who tweet me and like, oh, I can't believe you offered up that pick. Like, you think that wasn't all my lineups?
right. Where I'm right there with you.
Like, I hate to tell you, folks. If I'm saying here on the show, that means I've got a lot of that driver player in my pool.
And the thing about Briscoe, we didn't really like him on paper last week. It looks even worse on paper this weekend, but I'm going to be a little bit careful and play just a little bit of Briscoe, but it goes against every single thing I have ever said about a super speedway. But with the new next-gen car and with this being a bit of a hybrid, there is a chance he is a Ford. There's a lot of Fords up front. He could be the one leading the pack early on. If he leads the first 45 laps, no competition caution, and he happens to stay up front, I mean, there's a decent chance he could lead like 60 plus laps. And if he happens to finish inside the top 5, it might be enough to be optimal at his price point. I would say it's very unlikely. So I'm having a very small amount of Chase Briscoe because I think it's more likely the 2-team Penske cars, Logano and Blaney, are able to work the front. But I am being very cautious with Briscoe, and I'm hoping he's higher owned than he should be because of what he did last week, because on paper he's a pretty bad play.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things of, you look at that starting position and you just go, okay, what is the path to getting optimal? I mean, and to me, it's about those leading those laps. Mentioned about a question that came in here from JJT. He says, are you bumping 3 guys who tested Atlanta? Chastain, Buescher, and Kurt Busch. Of course, Kurt Busch starting 9th. He is 8,400 on DraftKings, 7,800 over on FanDuel. Ross Chastain, he is starting 7th, 8,000 on DK, 7,000 there over on FanDuel. And then the other one was Chris Buescher. who is starting 14th, 6,700 over on DraftKings.
So it definitely helps to have added track time. The problem is all these guys are in terrible spots for DFS today. Like some of these drivers I do like most weeks, but Kurt Busch starting 9th. It's just a tough path for him to be optimal. We also had Chastain starting 7th, Chris Buescher is starting 14th. Like these guys do not offer you much PD upside. And with this being drafting and stuff, I'm not really too worried about what they've done in the past because this is just a brand new track. And it's just not something I'm really concerned about today.
By the way, one of the drivers in this mid-tier, Harrison Burton, who was slated to start at 31st, he is going to the rear, two-time tech failures there. He's 6,400 on DraftKings, 4,000 on FanDuel. So really not a big difference at all. And something we talked about last week of at where we're at this point in NASCAR, a guy going to the back, it is what it is. Like, don't sit there and say, oh my God, I got to change lines because driver X is now in the back.
Right. And the competition caution helps them out as well to get reshuffled back closer to the front.
Yeah. Especially at least this one's lap 45 as opposed to much earlier on in the race. So something to stay into there. Alex Bowman, he is starting 11th, 8,800 on DraftKings, 9,200 over on FanDuel. Alex
Bowman is one of those guys where I am just not getting much to. I never usually play him at these types of tracks because he's always on the front row. He's averaging kind of similar to Larson, 3.8 DraftKings points per race the past 10 races at super speeds with an average finish outside of the top 20. If this is going to play out more like a hybrid, I could see him being a fringe top 10 guy, but again, tough path for him to being optimal. He's priced in between guys like Truex, Keselowski, who on paper look like much better plays. He's not a full fade guy for me, but I'm certainly going to be underweight on the field, which doesn't look like he's going to be high owned anyway, but I think it's for a good reason.
Yeah, of course, when you want to get access to all of our ownership projections, you got to sign up for Awesemo Plus Weekly Pass. You can get that for $29.95, gives you access to everything we have over awesemo.com. If you missed it, we actually had projections for F1 today. That was free on the website, so you got to check out that. And, of course, new members can get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Use that promo code NASCAR LBL, and of course, so you get those. If you just want an Awesemo Plus NASCAR package, you can get that as low as $9.95 a week. And of course, noted that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on. It could easily be added with those packages at checkout, but it's not included in our base packages, and it's certainly a very valuable addition to the DFS arsenal. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. And Alex Bowman, let's give you a little note on the ownership. He's under 10%. So I thought a little nugget out there for you, but if you want to get the complete ownership projections, you got to sign up for the Awesemo Plus Weekly Pass, and great to get you NASCAR, get you NBA. Baseball is right around the corner. Spring training has started. Living here in the Tampa Bay area, as you got the Phillies and the Blue Jays and the Yankees. Everyone is excited now for the start of the Major League Baseball season. Christopher Bell, that is someone that you mentioned, and he was by far in my crunches was number one in terms of how much I was getting to him. He's starting 27th, 7,700 over on DraftKings, and 8,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, it's kind of impossible not to like Christopher Bell today. I mean, if you're in cash games, he's a cash game lock. The ownership's going to be high. Starting in 27th, unless he wrecks, he is going to gain a good amount of spots today. And if you like all the other Joe Gibbs cars, like Martin Truex Jr., like Denny Hamlin, it makes no sense not to like Christopher Bell as well. You can throw Kyle Busch into the mix there, but with all the extra added PD with Bell in that low 7.7K price point, pretty cheap on FanDuel at 8K. Wasn't getting him to pop just as much, just probably due to roster construction, but no reason at all not to like Bell. I mean, easily a top 15, top 20 contender without getting wrecked out.
One of the guys that we are seeing getting some ownership here, Austin Dillon, who is starting 17th, 7,400 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel.
Yeah, Dillon's a guy starting in 17th. It's like if you're hand building, it's hard to get there because all the extra added PD in the 7K range. But he's good at intermediate tracks. He's good at super speedways, so he's got both of those boxes checked. Mm-hmm. He's starting 17th, kind of in the middle, where he's not going to be major chalk, but he's not going to be someone that you have to worry about ownership too much. I do think he's a very solid tournament play just to get off of a chalkier Christopher Bell and Ricky Stenhouse because easily has top 10, top 12 upside.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the Stenhouse ownership on DraftKings is different than on FanDuel. But I mean, look, Stenhouse is going to be a chalky play. I mean, look, there's a reason we joke about nicknaming him Spinhouse Jr. I mean, Wreckhouse. I mean, there's various names that he gets called, and it's a matter of how much do you want to trust. But I mean, look, in a cash games, I mean, it's going to be hard to ignore him.
Right. It's just, it never feels good, but starting in 28th, he's a good super speedway driver. He really is. He's a race winning contender at these. And if he's able to be aggressive and use the pack and get towards the front, I mean, he's honestly alive to win the race, to be honest. It's crazy how that sounds.
Bubba Wallace, starting 19th here, 7,300 on DraftKings, 8,500 on FanDuel.
So I wrote Bubba Wallace up over on the Awesemo tournament article. He's actually one of my favorite GBP plays on the entire slate. I mean, his odds to win this race are similar to guys like Austin Cindric, Chase Briscoe, Kurt Busch, Keselowski, guys that we are definitely on and certainly could end up winning the race. And Bubba Wallace, well, people don't really love playing him too much. He's in a perfect spot here because $7,300 starting right beside Stenhouse as far as not starting, but as a DK salary goes, and he's in that Christopher Belchalk range. So he should get overlooked a little bit, but Bubba's actually a very good plate racer. He's got 4 top 5s the past 10 races. He finished P2 at Daytona. I believe the last 3 races he's finished inside the top 3 or top 5. So track record's been good, and I can certainly trust him at these types of tracks.
Now, when we look at, these drivers that are in the 6K range, so we got some place differentials here. So you got Eric Jones starting 23rd, Daniel Suarez 13th, Chris Buescher, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, 14th, Michael McDowell 21st, Harrison Burton, who we mentioned, starting 31st, but he's actually in the rear now. Cole Custer 20th, Justin Haley 22nd, and Ty Dillon 18th. Now, the 2 drivers here that people are getting to are Eric Jones and Cole Custer. Are you with the field on these 2 guys?
So as far as being as my highest on drivers, I am not with the field there. I am currently highest on Michael McDowell. And I believe the guy I'm second highest on is either Eric Jones or Harrison Burton. So I can get with the Eric Jones chalk. He's actually a pretty good super speedway driver. He showed us some speed so far this season, but I like Michael McDowell a lot. Starting in 29th, I'm hoping just because he's priced up more than he normally is that people kind of flock away from him. But the guy won at Daytona last season. He's got 3 top 5s at super speedways, 4 top 10s. The guy knows how to handle himself in the draft, and these front row cars tend to perform pretty well in this kind of racing package. So I'm really on Michael McDowell. Obviously, I still like Harrison Burton starting at 31st, kind of in that 4th Penske car with the Wood brothers, which I like all the other Penske cars. So I don't see why I shouldn't like Harrison Burton, even though he's going to the rear, which doesn't make a huge difference for me. But I'm a little bit different from the field, but also kind of in the same vicinity.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at guys like Justin Haley, Ty Dillon, I mean, they're getting no ownership.
Right. And I like them in tournaments. I mean, Justin Haley's in a colleague car. We know Justin Haley is a pretty good super speedway driver. He does have a win. Got a little bit lucky with rain, but starting 22nd, if no one's going to play these guys, they have top 15 potential. Ty Dillon, he's a guy that typically was always getting strong finishes at these types of tracks, has an average finish of 14.7 and second in DraftKings points per race, only behind Denny Hamlin at super speedways. So even though they have low ownership, don't completely forget about them. Actually, some decent leverage spots.
Seeing the questions about David Reagan, we'll get into David Reagan here very shortly. If you do got any questions about this one in terms of Andrew mentioned, favorite 73 and under driver over on DraftKings. I mean, if you look at that under 7,300, okay, so you got Stenhouse. We've talked about him at length. But he's going to be the chalk, and I think, Andrew asked the question. I think probably part of it's got to be are you looking at a GPP or are you looking at a cash games? I mean, like in cash, I think I'll have a lot of Ricky Stenhouse Jr.
Right. If it's cash games, I'm just not even thinking about it. I'm locking Ricky Stenhouse. If it's a tournament, Bubba Wallace is right there at $7,300, and I think he's one of the best plays on the slate today, especially just trying to gain leverage on the field.
Yeah, no question about that. Let's move into those lower tier salaries. So this will be everyone underneath 6,000. So you got Noah Gragson starting 30th, Todd Gilliam starting 25th, David Reagan starting 35th, Corey LaJoie 33rd, Greg Biffle 37, Josh Bookey 36, BJ McCullough 34, Cody Ware 32. And it doesn't matter what type of race it is. I'm always setting a group when it comes to this one. As I'm putting in our projections because and this is it's a way that you manipulate the fantasy cruncher, because fantasy cruncher is just they're looking at numbers and they're coming up with lines for you. Literally for the most part, I never want I'll tell it no more than one, in this range. But David Reagan is someone that is getting ownership, and there's been so many questions I've seen in chat already about him.
Yeah, I was getting a lot of questions really about David Reagan. So it seems like people really want to play him today. And it might be because he was optimal at Daytona. He's in a similar starting spot, had a really good finish at the end. So I totally understand it. It's not pretty in a Rick Ware racing car, but the guy who knows how to get good finishes at super speedways, average finish inside the top 20, starting 35th. He's dirt cheap at $5,400. I can get behind Reagan, and really all these 5K plays from LaJoy and up are pretty much all the same. They're just kind of getting different down low. I think Noah Gregson's going to pick up some ownership in a colleague car, because if we like Justin Haley to get a good finish, I mean, you have to assume Gregson will be in a similar position. But yeah, all these 5K guys outside of the scrubs like Biffle and Bulicki are pretty playable.
Yeah, you look at Corey LaJoy. That's a guy that people are getting to. We are seeing some ownership, a little bit of ownership there on Greg Biffle, starting 37th, and he's starting 37th. I mean, but it's just question. This is always my fear with these guys, is that is something just going to happen early on that race, and it's just going to kill your lineup.
Yeah, I'm having a really hard time. Like, I know he's starting dead last, and at this kind of race, you'd be like, well, yeah, maybe we should play some Greg Biffle. The problem is, I just have a hard time trusting him to be able to last 500 miles. This is a very long race, 325 laps, and I don't really want to use practice too much. But he was 36 in the one lap. I don't think we got a 10-lap run out of him, so it's not like he was showing us any speed. Like, just to compare, Bulicki, a guy that you don't really like that much, he was 24th in practice and 13th in the 10 laps. So at least he was able to show that he can stay within the pack. I do have my doubts about Greg Biffle with that.
Yeah, I mean, the question, it's always, joke about it, is how low can we go? I mean, is Corey LaJoy, Josh Bulicki really, maybe Bulicki at 5,000 the lowest you really want to go?
I like max for these like absolute bottom barrel scrubs, like Bulicki, Biffle, McLeod, Cody Ware. I'm looking at like 2 to 3% max in case we get like a mass carnage race where it's just like all these guys are popping the optimal because they finished top 20. But for me, as far as like real ownership goes, LaJoy has been the lowest I've been going.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and if you've got an optimizer like Fantasy Cruncher, I highly recommend creating a group so you make sure you kind of limit how you can, get down into this range. Of course, this is the Awesemo NASCAR Live Before Lock shows. We're getting you ready for today's NASCAR race. Green flag will be here at 3:17 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, we'll be here till 3 o'clock answering any questions that you have. And of course, we are sponsored by PrizePicks, and of course, be sure to sign up over there at PrizePicks, and you get 1 free month of Also Plus Platinum when you sign up, deposit, and play over at PrizePicks. Of course, be sure to use that promo code Awesemo for an instant first match deposit up to $100, and of course, use all the player prop tools that we have over at awesemo.com to figure out what to play here. And Chris, I know first off, let's talk a little bit about fantasy scores, and we'll start off with Austin Cindric. 32.5 is the current number there.
So I'm hoping it didn't move since I looked.
I have it in front of my computer right now. It's still 32.5.
Okay. Yeah, I really like hitting that. I mean, 32.5 is a pretty good number for Austin Cindric. I mean, I know I'm not putting everything into what he did at Daytona, but he's part of that Penske stable, which typically runs the front at super speedways. He's in Brad Keselowski's old car. We know Keselowski was always able to stay up front, and Cindric seems to have what it takes as a rookie to get up front. If he's working with Joey Logano, we're working with Ryan Blaney, I don't see a reason why he can't finish top 5, top 10 in this race. And for him to only hit 32.5 points, I believe we are only looking at a top 14 finish. So assuming he doesn't end up wrecking out, I mean, I think Cindric's not a lock to get in there, but I'd say there's a pretty good chance.
And right next to him, right there on PrizePicks, you can see it on the screen, Brad Keselowski, 40.5.
And it does not feel good. I know Keselowski's been killing us all season. If you've been playing him outside of Daytona and the speed weeks at Daytona, but for him to get to get over 40 points, we're looking at a top 14, top 15 mixed in with some fast laps, which again, fast laps are random, but everyone's going to pick up a couple, which boosts their scores up by a point or two throughout the entire field. So I know he's a guy that likes to wreck and likes to wreck people, but assuming he's doing all the wrecking, hopefully he can clear his way for a top 15 finish and he'll be sitting pretty.
Now, the number that you gave me on a lap sled driver, which is Ryan Blaney, has gone up since we chatted this morning about it. And that is, so earlier today, it was 23.5 for Ryan Blaney. It is now 26.5.
Okay, well, it makes me feel good that I was before the line moved for sure, but I still like the 26.5. I currently have him projected for around 40, 50 laps today. Again, it's kind of hard to project dominator points at a track like this, but I really like that he's on the front row. He's going to have Joey Logano pushing him, hopefully, early on. If he can lead up until the competition caution, if he's the guy up front, I can't imagine everyone's going to try to wreck each other before the competition caution. So he could honestly hit that before that yellow comes out. But by stage one, I see there's a decent chance Ryan Blaney's the top dominator and hits over 26.5 laps.
And it's no matter what we're talking about, NASCAR or any other sport over at PrizePicks, you want to get in early. When you see that line you like you mentioned liking when that line was 23.5 on Ryan Blaney, you got to jump on those lines. You can't wait till the last minute, because all of a sudden that line that maybe you really liked on a Saturday, and mentioning for NASCAR, once you know the qualifying's done, and number may not be there the next day. So that's a little hat tip over when you play over at PrizePicks. Of course, as I mentioned, get 1 free month of Also Plus Platinum when you sign up, deposit, and play over at PrizePicks. And of course, you'll get an email within 24 to 48 hours on how you can claim that free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Looking at the betting side of the equation, should just kind of pulled up some numbers over here. Talk about the winners. And you mentioned about the Ricky Stenhouse Jr. plus 2,500 to win the race.
So his odds must have got better, because last time I looked, it was at plus 4,000. So he's trending in the right direction. And it might have been because people saw what happened in practice, and we got confirmation that's going to be pack racing, which does benefit Ricky Stenhouse. So while the odds aren't as good as they were, he's still one of those guys that is certainly live in this race, whether you like it or not, unfortunately.
Yeah, the top two in terms of winning their race are both Ryan Blaney and Kyle Larson. They're plus 950.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, because if this is like a full-on super speedway race, Kyle Larson is really not that great at these types of tracks. But Ryan Blaney, he's both great at intermediate and super speedway races. So while it is chalky, Ryan Blaney is certainly like the guy that just fits the mold for winning this race today.
Yeah, you mentioned how much you like Christopher Bell with his place differential today. He is 30-1 to win this race.
Yeah, he's not. If you're looking at his finishes at these types of tracks, it's not pretty. But again, with this being like an intermediate hybrid, it's really hard to gauge on where these guys should be projected to finish. But I mean, just as far as fantasy goes, starting in 27s, it's hard to get away from.
Of course, if you got any questions, be sure to line those up here for the last half hour of the show. We'll just be answering your question. I know there's been a lot of conversation, Chad, about the practice times. How much are you taking that in consideration today?
It's not something I care about at all, to be honest. Like, it's nice to see if a driver can hang with the pack in practice, but as far as looking at the numbers, these guys are drafting in packs. And if Cody Ware was P10 in practice, if you think Cody Ware is the 10th fastest car, it's just not something I can get behind. So I'm really not looking at these numbers whatsoever. I mean, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had the first in the one lap. Christopher Bell was third in the one lap. I don't think these guys are going to be like the top 5 cars when it's all said and done. Yeah,
I mean, there has been several comments about Cody Ware's practice times, and it's that's why we got you here to answer these questions. Of course, you got any questions, be sure to leave those in chat. Who is the best long shot driver to win today?
I mean, guys we talked about, Bubba Wallace, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., these guys that are kind of aggressive. I mean, can kind of be wreckers or checkers, but they can certainly pay off. And I mean, they have long shot odds for a reason, but they're certainly live. One guy I don't think we've talked about much, Austin Cindric, besides the PrizePicks prop. I believe last time I looked, I pulled odds back up. He is currently sitting at plus 2,000. So not as like amazing odds, but it's still kind of deep there. He won Daytona 500. He's a Penske car. I mean, I can certainly see him being in that same category, Stenhouse and Bubba Wallace today.
Next up, Steel Curtain saying, how much Brad is too much Brad?
I'm looking about half my lineups. They have Brad Keselowski, and nearly half my lineups have Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So it's not going to be a comfortable 2 to 3 hours for me today. I'll tell you that.
Amanda, she goes, favorite all-time pick for cash on DK, Chris.
Today for DK, Brad Keselowski, I was just talking about. He's my favorite cash play today. The price works at both sites. I love Brad Keselowski in cash. Yeah,
that's something. Of course, you mentioned about Christopher Bell. We mentioned about Stenhouse, he's going to be a chalk play, no question about it. And that's a lot of that times is when, for me, just personally, it's just me, when I look at chalk plays, it ultimately depends on what type of contest I'm entering and how it changes my thought process.
Yes, for sure. Like, I'm certainly the same way, because some contests I'm trying to get extra leverage just depending on the entries, the entry fee, because you can kind of gauge on how people are going to play. And it's totally different throughout the entire contest over on DK or FanDuel.
Paul would like to know favorite under 6,500 on DraftKings, not named Reagan.
Not named David Reagan. Well, it just missed the Michael McDowell cutoff. So Harrison Burton's right there, $6,400. Yes, I know he's going to the rear. I don't think it matters at all. $6,400, 4,000 over on FanDuel, 31st. Hard not to like him. Kind of a similar play to McDowell.
Ed saying, does Kevin Harvick have a shot to do anything today?
He certainly has a shot. Not sure he's going to get up front and dominate, but he could just kind of quietly get a top 5 today, which I'm not sure that's going to be quite optimal. It just depends on what the other drivers do at similar price points. But I do have a little bit of Kevin Harvick today, for sure.
Of course, if you do got any other questions, be sure to line those up in chat. I always, I mentioned this on the MMA shows with Pete. We say, what fight are we not talking about? What driver are we not talking about?
Wow, man, who haven't we talked about? Well, we went a while with not talking about Austin Cindric. So I think we kind of hit on him already. I don't think we've talked about like Daniel Suarez, Chris Buescher, and we haven't really hit on them much. And I think that's for good reason. They're just in really tough spots. I've been on Daniel Suarez and Chris Buescher quite a bit, but their starting spots at 13 and 14, they're just kind of getting drowned out by that 6K range. But I don't know, the field, I feel like we kind of covered a good chunk of it.
Yeah, look, it's, every week there's going to be a driver. I mean, look, last week it was Chase Briscoe.
Right.
That was the guy that we looked at and said, you know what, just not. I mean, it's, but it's like someone else said, they feel like this track scares the crap out of them.
Oh, it does to me. I'm right there with you. I'm not going to lie. It's definitely going to be scary. It's definitely going to be scary.
I'm guessing Alan mentioned about maybe the driver we're not talking about. He mentions Chase Elliott.
That's actually, we haven't talked about Chase Elliott much. So, yeah, he's kind of in that same boat as Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano, where they could be an early dominator. Because if it's not Ryan Blaney or Joey Logano, I think it's going to be Chase Elliott. Obviously, Chase Briscoe, you can throw his hat in the ring too. But as far as upper price guys go, I think Hendricks should be able to maneuver well in traffic. And obviously, they can always team up with Kyle Larson, Alex Bowman, and William Byron. They have a very strong team. And these guys typically do run well super speedways. The problem is they don't usually finish well. But Chase Elliott's one of those guys that is actually able to finish these races. And 10,300 starting in 6, you get a little bit more PD upside from the Penske guys. I think he's certainly a fine pivot, but I don't think the ownership's going to be too different from the Penske stable.
Mad Dog saying, goes, I think Blaney is still risky due to pit crew problems. I mean, and we know you're a Ryan Blaney guy, but I mean, like there's pros and potentially cons of him starting up where he is. Yeah,
he's not a safe play. Like I am not touching him in cash games, especially with the nature of this track. Like last week on the poll, I'm all about Ryan Blaney because it's a completely different scenario. He's at a short, flat track where 100 points are going to rack up quickly. If Blaney doesn't win this race, there's a strong chance he's not optimal. So when you're playing Blaney, you're taking a chance he's winning the race or leading like 100 plus laps and finishing P1, P2, or P3.
And of course, if you do got any other questions about this race, be sure to line those up in chat. We got 20 minutes here left in the show. Next question we got about Noah Gragson. He's starting 30th. He's 5,800 on DraftKings.
Yeah, I like him. He's a fringe cash play for me. He's starting in 30th. He's in a colleague car, so it's not like he's in junk equipment down there. Pretty much same ride as Justin Haley. And I mean, Gragson has got plenty of experience super speedway. He's starting in 30th. He's just cheap. I mean, $3,500 over on FanDuel. He's got honestly top 15, top 20 upside, and starting all the way back in 30th. He's a pretty good play. I have over 20% of him in my exposures today.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I was doing my crunches, Christopher Bell, it was crazy amount of ownership. I mean, it was my first when I started, usually when I start my crunches, I just do a dummy crunch. I'm like, let me see what spits out there. Right. And then it's okay, let me start adding some groups in. And even after I put in all my various things I put in, I was still good amount of Christopher Bell.
Right there with you.
I mean, look, and it can be good or bad, and for me, it comes down to is like, hey, what kind of contest am I playing in? Mike says, he goes, am I crazy? I want Blaney or Joey in every lineup in a 20 max.
In every lineup, I think you're pushing it. Like, I do like these guys as potential dominators at the beginning, but if I'm building 20 laps today, there's no way I'd have a guy starting second or third at a potential super speedway. And each and every single lineup, I'd want to differentiate to guys like Chase Elliott as well, maybe some Kyle Busch, because we have a lot of randomness and unknowns of this track. So going in with the thought process of one of these two guys is going to be optimal. It just seems a bit over aggressive for a very unknown track.
Like literally, I just did a dummy crunch, and Christopher Bell. So this is not putting any randomness in, not unique drivers, just total dummy crunch. He was the fourth highest. Only ones, I'm sure you could probably name 3 drivers in front of him: Martin Truex Jr., Ricky Stenhouse, Kyle Larson. Not really a surprise that those would be the 3 drivers in front of them, but you had a great point mentioning earlier on the show about with Kyle Larson and Martin Truex Jr. in terms of their super speedways, not great numbers when you look at their fantasy scores.
Yeah, and I like them today, but if you're looking at track history at Daytona, Talladega type tracks, I mean, there's some of the worst drivers at these. Kyle Larson's averaging negative points per race, and he typically starts up front and gets wrecked out. It's going to be hard to tell how much of an intermediate as this plays out, because if there's not a bunch of wrecks, Kyle Larson at intermediate is still a guy that we'd expect to be in the top 5. So there's definitely a reason to want to go underweight on them, despite projections loving them. So if you go with the narrative of that and just go to pivot some guys that are just specifically good at super speedways, that's certainly a way to go, but it can be scary because of how well they project.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things of, and just kind of running another crunch on my end, just throwing some randomness in there to see what it kind of spits out. And I mean, yeah, it's at that point, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. becomes the highest owned, which is not it's not surprising. I mean, it's just not surprising based on his salary and the place differential that is there.
Yeah, it's just hard not to get these guys, because if this was Daytona, like we're actually at Daytona, these are the guys that are going to end up being chalky because of how the nature of the race plays out. With this being unknown, I mean, it makes sense to want to be potentially underweight on some of these high ownership guys because we're not exactly sure what to expect. But on paper, it just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and really just kind of as I look through these questions, I'm just looking to see how much money was left on the table. Because I mean, look, this could be a race where Optimal could have a lot of money, left on the table.
Yeah, I ran 20 crunches earlier just with no settings and all. And I think the average salary remaining was about 1,000 on each lineup.
Yeah. Next up, Randy says Reddick has speed. Can he stay in the top 5?
He can, but just staying in the top 5 is not going to be good enough today. Because again, he's had speed this season, but this is completely different. This is a Daytona type track where you can't just bank on guys getting fast laps. They're going to be spread out through the entire field. That's usually the reason why I play Reddick, because he's got a fast car and picks up fast laps and finishes fringe top 5. For him to be optimal today, he's pretty much going to go out there and win the race and lead a lot of laps, which the chances of that are pretty slim, especially starting behind the 2 Penske cars.
By the way, the only driver that is going to the back is Harrison Burton. He did fail tech 2 times. That's why he's going to the back of the field. That is the only driver there. JJT asking Custer or LaJoy for $1,000 less.
Yeah, I would go with LaJoy. And even if they were the same price, I'm still going with LaJoy. I trust him a little bit more. Super Speedway starting all the way back in 33rd. Just typically one of those guys that knows how to finish in the top 20. And that's all I can ask for his price point and where he's starting.
Jordan asking about if someone is a good pivot, and he names Denny Hamlin.
Yeah, I like Hamlin's going to be chalky today, so it's kind of weird to call him a pivot, but he's going to be lower owned more than likely than guys like Larson and Truex. So just directly pivoting to Hamlin, who's an exceptional play racer. And it's kind of what we talked about earlier, where Truex and Larson kind of suck at these tracks, but Hamlin's near the very top of the list. So maybe just getting off of one of those guys, the Hamlin is a pretty good way to go in tournaments.
Of course, if you do got any questions, be sure to line those up in chat. And of course, one of the things that we always love to see after the contests are over are those winning screenshots. And we want to see you go into the Awesemo Hall of Fame. Of course, all you got to be doing is rocking that Awesemo avatar on your DFS profile. Finished in the top 3 with a contest over 5,000 contestants. Tweet your wins to @Awesemo HOF, and you win a free month of Also Plus Platinum. And only you can only win that once per calendar year. And looking at some of the people who've gone into Awesemo Hall of Fame over the past couple of days, Carlos taking down a contest over there on FanDuel NBA, winning $1,000. Also, Jesus taking down second place on FanDuel, winning $1,500. Jacob going over there over on NBA DraftKings, winning $3,500. Kush, you taking down first place there in that contest. Also, guy Dave making 4 picks over there over at PrizePicks and walking away with $1,000. Kudos to him. Also, Joey taking a 5-teamer over at Parlay, $10, turn that into $730. Kudos to you. Congratulations on your wins over there. Of course, you got to check out Odd Shopper for everything we have betting wise over here at Awesemo.com. Steve says, are team stacks a bad idea?
So it's not something I normally do, but at a track like this, intermediate / super speedway hybrid, where I think teams could actually come into a play. Now, it's not something I did personally, but it was in my thought process, where if you have an optimizer like Fantasy Cruncher, you could go in, set these guys up as teams. And if you have, say, using Austin Cindric, make sure you use at least one of Joe Logano, Ryan Blaney. So I don't think it's the worst way to go, because if these guys are working together and they don't wreck, you have to assume there's going to be some correlation there at the end.
No question about that. Of course, we mentioned about groups are so huge for me in NASCAR and creating lineups. I mean, and getting the right ones out there. And we mentioned about, with today, it's about stacking back, place differential. You mentioned earlier about, one of the settings you had in terms of, these guys in the top 12 of, you don't want to get to a ton of these guys. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where, you've done a lineup and you've got like 2 or 3 of those guys in your lineup. At that point, probably time to start over.
Totally agree.
Jim is throwing out Todd Gillihan as a sleeper today.
Yeah, I don't think I've gotten one question today about Todd Gillihan, so I'm going to assume it's going to reflect on ownership today. And from everything I've seen, it's just because he's starting 25th. And if you look at that entire 5K range, all these guys are starting in the 30s. So it's just like, why not go to those other guys for more PDF side? But Gillen's in a front row car, similar to Michael McDowell, and they tend to run these track types pretty well. And Gillen has not been terrible this year. So just as if you want to get double the field on Gillen, it's not like you have to play 20%. If you just play like 8%, 10%, you're getting some really good leverage. So I don't hate it just as a cheap differentiation play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at one of my cash lineups and I'm like, I've got a fair amount of salary left on the table. It becomes that place differential, especially look, it's that, and I'm sure a lot of people are probably having this debate on, if you're looking at that cheap play of whether it's Reagan or LaJoy.
Right. And personally, for me, if it's like a single entry build, I trust LaJoy a little bit more. I mean, I like Reagan today, but the Brickware Racing, it just doesn't give me the most confidence. I can trust LaJoy a little bit more, but Reagan's going to have lower ownership. So if you're playing tournaments, people aren't going to want to click on Reagan as much, but I personally prefer LaJoy.
Appreciate this super chat there from A. Wright. Says, any love for Ross Chastain today?
Yeah, I'm going to say no. And then he's going to come out and lead 100 laps, because guys like Chastain and Briscoe, we just keep not playing them. And then it makes no sense on paper, but they just come out and dominate. I personally have very little Ross Chastain. He's not a full fade for me, but he's one of those guys where I have just a sprinkle just to cover myself when it just implodes.
Of course, we're all trying to find that optimal lineup. And one of Chris's great lines from this today is that he's hoping that Eric Amarola doesn't continue this optimal lineup streak that he's been on. For those who don't know, he has been optimal 3 of the 4 races this year. So you're hoping that goes 3 for 5.
Yeah, he's similar to Chastain, where he's starting inside the top 10. The price where he is, I like every single other 7K driver more than Amarola. So just naturally, as an optimizer, he's not going to get spit out as much. And I can't play everybody, so I'm just hoping he just does not finish inside the top 5.
Andy throwing it out there. Is Martin Truex Jr. a bad play? Of course, that is going to be a chalk play today, though.
Yeah, he's not a bad play on paper. And in tournaments, I'd understand when to be underway, because this is not one of those guys we typically like playing at a Daytona type track, because he just does not get good finishes. But with this being a bit of a hybrid mix, I obviously always like Truex intermediates. He was very fast earlier in the season. Starting in 26, I mean, $9,200 is cheap for Truex. And as long as he limps his way into a top 15, top 12, he's good chance of being optimal today.
DDS got a DraftKings GPP 2v2 question for you. McDowell and Bubba, or Keselowski and LaJoy? I think I know which way you're going on this one, but I'll let you answer the question.
Since it's a tournament, the first one with McDowell and Bubba, I think it's going to be a bit lower owned. And I love Bubba in tournaments today, because Keselowski is going to be chalky. LaJoy's going to pick up some ownership. I've gotten a lot of questions about him today. So I'll start with the first one for just the lower ownership.
Appreciate the super chat there from Eddie. Says best two pay ups on a DraftKings GPP and best two values DraftKings GPP.
So since it's GBP, we really can't talk about Larson. We can't talk about Truex. So Chase Elliott's a guy that I'm liking quite a bit in tournaments. I know like the Penske guys, but Chase Elliott starting in 6th, I think he's definitely got a chance to potentially win this race. I also like, I guess, 2 spend ups. Hamlin, I hate to call him a tournament play because he's still going to pick up some ownership, but he's certainly going to be lower owned than Truex and Kyle Larson. So for me, Elliott, Hamlin are guys to get to. As far as the low owned guys go, Gragson, Harrison Burton, him going to the rear, not that it matters much, but it might lower his ownership a little bit, but it just makes no difference to me. So those are 2 guys I like in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the upper tier salaries today, I mean, Larson and Truex Jr. are the chalk. So if you're getting away from those guys, and I mean, look, and you mentioned about how this Atlanta track has changed, of how does this race play out? Does it play out like a super speedway, or does it play out like an immediate track? And but if you want to separate yourself from the field, like say you're getting into these big GPPs and maybe you're throwing a single bullet, maybe you're throwing a couple entries out there, getting away from the chalk is a way to differentiate yourself. But it could, these guys could rack up a ton of points today.
Right. The thing we always talk about is you don't have to fade all the chalk. You can still play some chalk today. Like if you want to play Truex and Larson, you can do that, but try to get different in the mid-tier guys. Like instead of just putting in a chalk Ricky Stenhouse, throwing in Austin Cindric, or throwing above Wallace for Austin Dillon, which is something we talk about each and every single week.
Andrew brings up Eric Amarola saying, is he a good play? I mean, we've talked about what he's done so far this year, but the problem you get to, he's starting 10th.
Right. And for his path to be optimal, it's just the guys he is priced around. He's going to have to beat out Austin Dillon starting 7 spots further back, Stenhouse starting 18 spots further back, Bell starting 17 spots further back. Like those guys don't have to finish in the top 5 to be optimal. Eric Almirola is going to have to finish in the top 5, top 3 to even have a chance of being optimal today with his limited PD upside.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what we're seeing in terms of ownership for Eric Almirola, I think the question becomes is, would you rather get to, say, maybe pay up a little bit more for a Kurt Busch who's starting 1 spot ahead of him?
That's the thing. They're like in that dead zone with Ross Chastain, Kurt Busch, and Austin and Eric Almirola, where I'm just not getting to much of them. Kurt Busch, I probably trust a little bit more, but Almirola in his own right, he's in a Ford, which I think they're definitely going to bring some speed. There's just 2 guys I am not really getting to whatsoever. So it's hard to compare the 2 because they're just 2 guys I'm viewing similar, where I'm just not getting them in my lineups at all.
Next question, Jim Parrish says, thoughts on William Byron? Of course, he is starting 12th, 9,400 on DraftKings, 10,500 over there on FanDuel.
Yeah, we were talking about him earlier. He's just one of those guys where you have to hope he doesn't wreck, because when he's not wrecking at a plate style race, he is typically getting a top 5 finish. He has a win at Daytona, which is a track I'm certainly putting in projections as a similar track type to use for today's race, but half the time he's wrecking out and finishing in the late 30s. So with Byron, you're basically flipping a coin and he's either going to wreck or he's not. And if he doesn't wreck, I mean, there's a decent chance he could slide in the optimal starting P12.
Kenny over on Twitch has a DraftKings single entry question for you. Eric Jones or Bubba Wallace?
I would side with Bubba Wallace. The Eric Jones starting in 23rd, I think pick us up a little bit more ownership, especially after having a couple hot starts to the season. But I really like Bubba Wallace at super speed races, finished P2 at Daytona early in the season, starting 19th, right beside Stenhouse. So we get that direct pivot off of him. I know Jones is right there too, but I'm going to side with Bubba just to get a little bit lower as far as the ownership goes.
Well, you mentioned David Reagan, their question coming about thoughts on him. Of course, that is definitely a guy that a lot of people are looking at, especially when they're hand building. Yeah,
I mean, we've got a lot of questions about David Reagan throughout the entire day, and it's not pretty. I mean, Rick Ware racing cars, it's really hard to trust the equipment too much, and his odds over, win the race on DraftKings are just completely bare, like plus 25,000. So, but the thing is, he's actually a pretty good super speed racer. He's got average finish inside the top 20 in the past several races at these, and at his price, if there is some guys wrecking out in this race, he's going to gain spots. He's not going to come out there running inside the top 15. He's just going to lay back, hopefully get some wrecks. And if he's P25, you're pretty happy with the output.
Yeah, I mean, and look, starting 35th. I mean,
right.
there's only a couple of spots he can go down. I mean,
right.
That's the other side of that.
Right. The floor is about as high as anybody on the slate.
Yeah. It's like, one of the terms we use in DFS is boom bust. Like as you look at a boom play today that maybe you're thinking like, man, I guess we could probably look at a guy like a Stenhouse Jr. Could be a boom bust, where if he doesn't wreck out, yeah, you got a chance that's a great score. But man, if he wrecks out, man, that's a huge bust like it was last week.
And that's exactly what I had in my head when you were talking about it. I was like, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., he is your boom bust play. I mean, he can easily get a top 10. We're looking at 50 plus points on DraftKings easily. And if he wrecks out, it's still not the worst thing in the world because he's starting 28th instead of a guy starting like 10th where you can get like negative 30 points. But Stenhouse and Keselowski, those are the kind of guys that are boom bust where they can break the slate or they can break your wallet at the end.
Mm-hmm. Andy has got 2v2 here. Truex and McDowell or Keselowski and Stenhouse.
Oh boy, those are four drivers I really like a lot today. I'm slightly siding with the Keselowski Stenhouse route, but it is very close.
Yeah, my initial thought just reading that, I was thinking Keselowski Stenhouse.
I just feel like Stenhouse is a little bit more upside than McDowell, and then Keselowski and Truex are basically even for me, so that's kind of the reason I'm slightly over on the other one.
Can Hamlin and Byron be optimal in the same line?
They can. They're going to have to finish pretty much within the top 5 in some of these PD plays to not hit their complete ceiling, but they can certainly both be optimal today.
Of course, we're just here. Lock is 19 minutes away here when green flag will drop here at 3:17 p.m. Eastern time. Chris, anything you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, it's going to be one of those races where we said at Daytona where don't check your money the entire time. Don't get too up. Don't get too down because there's a decent chance we could see a big wreck and all your money changes. So like I said, it might be the best idea to just close your app. But if you're like me, you can't do it and you're going to watch the whole time. So just try to keep your emotions low.
You're that guy, huh?
Yeah.
I can't like, look, once the race starts, I log in and I look at ownership for, what's ownership? Okay. Who's that guy in my cash lineups? I got, good leverage on the rest of the field and GPP, same situation. But if there's like 200 laps to go, I really try not to look. Or if I look, I don't want to be in the money.
I'm one of those do as I say, not as I do people. Like I'm going to do it, but I don't think you should do it.
No. There was, I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I had a single entry and it was like, I don't know, like 50 laps ago, something like that. And I was like 10th place. Yep. I sat there and watched that DraftKings app line move every lap.
Yeah.
When you get to the end of the race, it's just kind of what you do. But that is going to do it for this edition of the Awesemo NASCAR Live 4 Lock Show. Big thanks to our sponsor, PrizePicks. Be sure to check out PrizePicks. And of course, be sure to use that promo code also for instant first match deposit of up to $100. So appreciate everyone that's been here for the show. If you haven't hit that like button, really appreciate if you hit that like button. And we will talk to you next week on the Awesemo NASCAR Live Before Lock Show. Have a great day, everybody.